Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question was suggested by a viewer, thanks to Semper Ignotus for this one. Amy controls a Marchesa the Black Rose, and she plays a Black Sun Zenith with x equals 522 to kill all creatures. Let's say that when Amy does this, all of her creatures had a +1/+1 counter on them. Will Amy be able to get any of those creatures back with Marchesa's ability? Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need in order to answer this question is going to be a couple of important facts about how triggered abilities work. Anytime anything happens in the game, immediately after that thing happens, the game has to check to see if it's caused any triggered abilities to trigger. Now, normally when the game is doing this check, it takes a look at the battlefield and all of the permanents that exist there are checked to see if they have any triggered abilities that have triggered. You can start to see there's a little bit of an issue here though. State-based actions are performed all at once, as part of the same game action, and so that means that all of the creatures in this situation have died at the exact same time. Accordingly, when the game is performing this check immediately after the game has performed this event, the Marchesa will not be in play. And so we might think that that would mean that its triggered ability should not trigger because the game is not going to see a triggered ability that lets you bring those permanents back at the time when the game is making that check. However, this is not exactly how it works. Amy has a little bit of an ace up her sleeve because Marchesa's triggered ability is a little bit special. It's what's called a leaves the battlefield trigger, and these types of triggered abilities have special handling in the rules. As you can see, they're able to look back in time to the point immediately before the event that caused them to trigger. And so that means when the game is trying to decide whether Marchesa's ability triggered, it doesn't look at the game state immediately after where Marchesa is not on the battlefield, but rather it looks at the game state immediately before when Marchesa still is on the battlefield. This means that Marchesa's ability is able to trigger. There's a couple of important consequences to this. For example, this is the reason why any permanent that has a triggered ability with a condition like when this dies or when this leaves the battlefield can work at all. If we didn't have this sort of special handling, then these sorts of triggered abilities couldn't function at all because the game would not be able to see those triggered abilities on the battlefield at the time when it was making that check. Another important consequence of this fact is that Marchesa is able to trigger off of itself dying, as long as it had a +1/+1 counter on it. So if we were dealing with a damnation, then that would be the end of the story. Marchesa is going to trigger for all of Amy's creatures, and it's going to bring them all back, and Amy gets to go about her merry way. Unfortunately, there's one additional wrinkle that the Black Sun Zenith introduces to this question here. Remember what I said before. All state-based actions get performed at the same time, as part of the same game event. Now, one state-based action would be creatures with 0 or less toughness being put into their owner's graveyard. However, another state-based action that is going to happen in the Black Sun Zenith case would be if a permanent has +1/+1 counters on it and -1/-1 counters on it, then an equal number of both of those types of counters will be removed such that it will only have one type of counter on it afterwards. So, how would this fit in with Marchesa's trigger condition, which says that we need to have the creature with a +1/+1 counter on it in order to bring it back? Would the creatures be considered to have a +1/+1 counter on them immediately before they died or not? And it's not really immediately obvious how this situation should be resolved. Fortunately, there's a specific rule in the comprehensive rules that gives us a clear and definite answer. As you can see, if we have such a case, the game takes a look at what the creature looked like immediately before any state-based actions were performed on it when it's making that sort of determination. Accordingly, the game is going to consider all of Amy's creatures to have a +1/+1 counter on them because before any state-based actions were performed on them, they would have had both +1/+1 counters and -1/-1 counters. And so Marchesa's ability is able to trigger for all Amy's creatures and bring all of them, including Marchesa itself, back from the graveyard. Pretty great trick, right? But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. But until then, I hope you have a great day.